Good. Welcome, everyone. And thank you very much, Philip, and to Denise Mogas here at the Alliance for Peacebuilding. I'm delighted to welcome all of you in this new technological forum for our second Peace Call. And the subject of our call today is on storytelling in peacebuilding. And it brings together a number of streams of work that we're doing at the Alliance for Peacebuilding and responding to several important needs that we're seeing in the field. The first, of course, storytelling is central to any kind of peace building. That as people unspool their narratives and tell their stories of peace and war and their imagination, this all happens in the context of stories. So even when we deal with very concrete technical issues of peace building and building new institutions and treaties and the more formal elements, peace building and storytelling are intricately linked at the heart of our processes. So we wanted to highlight that element of peace building and storytelling. There's another need for our field as well, and that's how we tell the story of our own field. But so often I'm asked to talk about, well, what are success stories? How do you tell the stories of your field? Tell us what's really happening on the ground. And I feel as a field that we haven't had quite as much efficacy as we developing our own story. So here at the Alliance for Peacebuilding, we've been working for 2 years on a strategic communications campaign that seeks to change the narrative of peace and security here in Washington and then moving outward into the larger community in the United States and abroad. And thinking about how our members tell their own stories and how we can convey those stories to policymakers and other social change agents. So with all of that in mind, we are making a focus of our work at AFP in 2014. One of our focuses will be around storytelling and peace building. And we are holding this call to conversation going. We'll be joined by 2 wonderful speakers who are doing work in this area. The first is Kiran Sirah, who is the president of the International Storytelling Center based in Jonesboro, Tennessee, and is doing wonderful work connecting the storytelling field, which itself is exploding even outside peacebuilding. For those of you who listen to The Moth or to StoryCorps, you know that storytelling has developed real traction right now in our culture. And Kieran, as a peace builder, is linking that strong work on storytelling more generally to peace, developing some really exciting partnerships. So Kieran will talk with us about that. And then Jessica Berns is editor-in-chief of Building Peace, which is the Alliance for Peacebuilding's online publication that tells us stories of peace building for a non-expert audience. So for everyone you've ever talked with at a cocktail party or a think tank event who says, well, what is peace building? Building Peace answers that question. So we'll spend our time today. Kieran will make a presentation, then Jessica will speak, and then we'll move on to what I hope is a broader conversation among all of you. Are there any questions so far before we move on further? Good. Then Kieran, I turn the floor over to you. And we're just delighted you can join us today.
Okay, brilliant. Can you guys hear me okay? Can I get a wave? It's great to be here. And thank you for the invitation, Melanie. I just thought I'd like to start off because the last Peace Call session that we had, it was really interesting to see how much storytelling and the role of stories was coming up in conversations. We don't sometimes realize, but we wake up with stories, we go to bed with stories, and we dream stories. So I'd just like to say thank you, and on the eve of World Storytelling Day, happy Storytelling Day. Now, some of you can tell by my accent that I'm not from East Tennessee. I'm actually from the United Kingdom for 2 years. I came here on a Rotary Peace Scholarship. I came here to UNC and Duke to focus on looking at stories and international development, particularly looking at how stories can change our world, change lives, and help to shape a sense of identity and explore dimensions to human society. I am myself a son of a refugee, so all my life stories have been told to me. My own family came to Britain in 1972 from East Africa, and there were political refugees They couldn't take their houses, they couldn't take their couldn't take their money, but one thing that they could take was their stories. And these stories were the shaping of who I am today. They were stories that helped us navigate through the most difficult times, to challenge racism, discrimination. They are stories that helped me understand traditions that go back thousands and thousands of years, and to understand my sense of place and to establish a sense of home. And hence why I believe that storytelling and the way we understand stories plays such an important role in what we do in our world. So just to kind of illustrate, storytelling is something which I believe has roots in tradition. It's not only how we make sense of our world, but also how we communicate to others who we are and where we come from. But it's also something that's not just oral tradition. And to illustrate some of that, I did have two pictures I wanted to show you. And if you can, I'm going to hold this up to the screen. You may want to enlarge it. But one is this. And one is this one. Okay, so you may be able to guess what they are, but one is a ancient cave painting, and one was attached to the 1972 Pioneer probe, the first probe to leave the solar system. And what it was engraved on the probe because it was in case extraterrestrials come in contact with it, they understand something about the human story, where we come from. And I just wanted to show that because ever since the time of humans started painting images on caves or putting them onto probes, we've been trying to explain the human story. It's a part of our DNA, it's what we're about, and it's the very fabric of human society that helps us to understand who we are. So how is this relevant in peace building today? Well, in a globalized world, we're all on the move. I'm on the move. I'm from East London, grew up in Scotland. I'm now living in East Tennessee, running a storytelling center here, the International Storytelling Center, and a festival. But we're always on the move, whether we're traveling through choice or whether it's forced migration because of war, persecution, access to water. There are so many reasons that we are moving, constantly moving, and societies are changing. So therefore, the way we tell our stories to each other is a way to establish a sense of place, to interact with one another. But it also has a very destructive element to it. In my work in Northern Ireland, working with communities coming out of conflict, a 30-year war, to the west of Scotland, where the communities are made up of both Catholics and Protestants, but people that to some extent haven't even spoken to each other for many years, but live side by side. So we've seen how stories can also be used to divide communities, socially, culturally, politically. One of the things that came out of 9/11, stories have been used very much so as part of a healing process. The impact of 9/11 that happened in 2001 was something that happened all over the world, as many people of faith started to retreat into their own spaces and their own homes. In Edinburgh, where I used to work, there was, well, actually one example I'd like to give. In New York City after 9/11, all visits to cultural attractions declined apart from one place, and that was the Metropolitan Museum and the Islamic Gallery. It increased because people wanted to understand what was going on in the news, what was going on in the world. They wanted to find out for themselves. Wouldn't it be great if we had opportunities and individuals to tell their stories first person? And it's something that we did after 9/11, after an attack on a mosque, an attack on a synagogue, that we brought people together, 6,000 people, to use objects to tell everyday stories, the human story, of what it means to be British, what it means to be Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Christian, etc., and to live side by side. So that's why stories play that important role, especially in times of crisis. Well, one of the things that we can do is storytelling is so diverse. It's not just oral tradition, it's visual. It's the way we eat our food. It's traditions that we follow. It's also in the form of poetry and slam poetry. And if any of you have ever attended a slam poetry performance, you would hear the whole world being told in 3 minutes. It's a social movement. We can utilize it within social media. we can, and it's a chance for young people of our world to connect with issues that affect them. Issues from gentrification, lack of water, lack of toilets, lack of sanitation, to issues of racism, sexism, or gender inequality. It's a chance for us to kind of understand stories in very diverse and interesting ways. One thing that I believe that stories can do, I believe it's one of the most powerful forms of non-violent communication. It's a conflict prevention tool. So I think so much within the peace building world, it might be that the arts and the idea of using stories within an artistic realm is perhaps used as something that's soft, and maybe something that's going to use more towards post-conflict healing. I think the most powerful conflict prevention tool that we can use is the power of story, the human story, and the way that we can use storytelling in the that we're working to build solidarity and to help manage tension before it arises into conflict. If any of you, and I think there are other ways that we as organizations, as peace builders, can find connections with one another by sharing our stories from the outset. If you ever heard of the idea of when we think about storytelling, how we use our mobile phones and our digital medium, the ideas of using Twitter stories. There's Twitter haiku, where you have twaiku. We can use Twitter stories. We connect with each other and using the mobile phone device and using examples into examples such as photo voice, allowing people, enabling people and empowering people to tell their own personal stories in very meaningful ways, and for us as peace builders to help give people a platform and a stage so we can understand communities and their needs and interests. There are projects and there are programs in the world, and there are UNESCO programs to support indigenous languages. One of the greatest things that a community will talk about that's attached to identity is the mother tongue, the language that we speak, the languages that we're losing in the world. So I see that we can use indigenous languages and storytelling and ancient tradition to bring to the fore an understanding and a connection, and how we can give people and societies on the margins of society, but also on the peripheral of the global world, a chance to tell their story. And I think this is very relevant now as we move to 2015 and the end of the MDG goals, is where are the success stories, but where are the stories of failure too? What can we learn from that? And what is the impact? And how can we move forward? How can we move forward post 2015 that uses culture, the arts, and storytelling, and make that more of an impact in the work that we're doing and connecting to the heart? So that's where I'd like to end just there, and I'm open to questions, and I'm really looking forward to listening to Jessica now. I hope you can hear me still.
Hi, Kieran, thanks for going first and for really setting up a wonderful context for me to talk about building peace. I am assuming everyone can hear. Just a few nods would help. All this virtual stuff. You want some real feedback. People can hear me. Thank you. Thanks. I'm the editor-in-chief of Building Peace magazine, as Melanie said, and just I hope many of you, if not all of you, have seen the magazine online. I have 2 hard copies here. That was the first issue from last spring. That is the September issue. And next week we'll launch our 3rd issue, which is entitled Women, Men, and Peace. So the magazine is an online magazine, but we have a few hard copies that we produce. So if you haven't seen it yet, I hope you will. I hope you'll look out for it, and I hope we can make sure you receive it next week. You know, I think one of the things that happened as Melanie was describing the genesis of the magazine a couple of years ago is that through its work and its many collaborations, AFP identified a need to make the case for peace building. to make the case to policymakers, specifically to funders, and those who influence them, so constituents and lay people. So if we wanted to change the way policymakers address peace building and the way funders fund peace building work, who could we think to speak to and to speak with that could have exert some opinion and power and control over those groups? And so as a result, and as part of this strategic communications campaign that Melanie talked about, AFP designed, developed, and marketed, and it continues to market Building Peace magazine. Our audience is what we imagine to be a globally minded and committed group of people who are well informed about current events, but they are not experts. They're not peace building practitioners, they're not development practitioners. They might be, but not necessarily. But they're people who care about the world, they care about their greater community, and they likely interface with a lot of the countries that we work in as peace building practitioners. So whether it's because of their academic work or their work in the for-profit sector or their time as students or their travelers with a desire to know the world, they are interfacing with the countries represented in our magazine, the countries that are facing issues of fragility, post-conflict, development, post-conflict, peace building. So that's the audience we imagine for the magazine. And the goal, we do have like a very specific goal, I would say, which helps us when we think about each issue and helps us when we market the magazine. And it's to tell the stories of what peace building is, the many, many ways it's done, the lives it touches, why it matters, and the impact it's having. So really, it is to tell the stories of transformation, tell the stories of change. And one of the things we do think about is a point Melanie raised at the beginning. How do we talk about the work we do, the work that drives all of us and all of our colleagues in the field, in a way that makes it accessible and understandable to those who aren't in our field? So whether it's the cocktail party pitch, or whether it's just talking to friends in our most local communities about what we do. Each issue of the magazine has different, it's divided into different sections, but again, like when we talk to our authors about what we're looking for in terms of their tone, in terms of the way they write, we want to see the most accessible language possible. We want to move away from jargon and really create an opportunity for authors to tell their stories, or sometimes we have two authors kind of co-telling a story in a way that people won't be intimidated to read. They won't be put off because they don't understand certain language, or it feels too insular to them. And now as we go on, we're approaching our third issue next week, I did want to raise kind of what I see as challenges of storytelling, because everything Kieran has said, we totally endorse in our magazine, and that's what we're trying to do, but it's hard. It really is hard. And I think the first challenge is moving away from the jargon. So because we have this kind of layperson audience, people who are worldly and well-informed and smart, but again, they're not in our field. So we're trying to move away from jargon and really support our authors to write with their personal voice, to write in a committed and kind of compassionate and feeling way, and kind of say to them that the personal story is the most persuasive story. So as we talk about why the peace building work we do matters and why it's making a difference, that personal voice really turns out to be the most meaningful and captures our readers the most. And we see this when we look at our metrics about the articles that are downloaded, the articles that most viewers are gravitating towards, the articles that get recirculated or reposted. It's really the ones where the authors haven't been shy. They haven't been afraid to write with emotion and to have the personal comfort. So as I said, issue 3 is launching next week. Women, Men, and Peace is the topic, and we haven't circulated it yet. It hasn't launched, but we've done a lot of internal testing of this issue, And again, the articles that people are gravitating towards most are the ones that are personal, emotional, specific, vivid, and have quotes. So that's what, I think people are drawn to what feels tangible and where they can really say, okay, peace building, I know that there's such a thing as peacekeepers, and I know that there are, we've in certain parts of the world and peace, is still out of our reach in other places. But what does that really mean? Like, what does it mean to, have a peace treaty, and what happens in a country after that? What does it mean when there's violent protests every day, but you want to resist violence? So for instance, in this magazine that's coming out next week, we have a story, a first-person narrative by the only woman mayor in Afghanistan. It's a short article. We've really preserved her voice. She's written it. It's her vision for her country. And this is her story. And it just tells a nuanced, it provides a nuanced picture of what's happening in her country. And that is something that our, test groups and our internal readers have gravitated towards. The other is an article written by an NGO in the US that's done a lot of work in the DRC, and it's really about what the post-war conflict there has meant for men. And what is capturing the attention of our readers of that particular article, because it's not a first-person article, but is how descriptive it is, how specific it is, men and women providing quotes and snapshots into the world they're living in and the challenges they've faced in the country post-war. So with almost 3 issues under our belt, I feel as an editor-in-chief that for the most part, each issue has a few of these articles that really tell the story in the way that Kieran is talking about, and in the way that can influence, I believe, the way policies are made and funding is attributed. But overall, we hope to do a better job so that each issue, there's more of these compelling articles that really do the job of telling the story in an accessible and meaningful and compassionate way. So that is the context I wanted to provide about our magazine. And sitting where I do, what I'd be interested from you guys about are the stories that you want to tell to your friends and family. When you talk about your work, like, what are the stories that you gravitate towards that you think other people are interested in and grasping onto? So I'm interested in that because that helps me think about the kind of content we want to develop. And on the flip side, what are the stories you want to hear? I mean, where are places you've worked that you'd like to kind of use our magazine as a platform for talking about those stories, for relaying some of those stories? So for me, these are the 2 questions on my mind to make this a more collaborative discussion.
Yeah, really exciting. Congratulations on the new magazine. So now we'd love to hear from you. We can open up the floor to any questions. I'll bring Melanie up to the stage to sort of kick off Q&A. And if anyone has any other questions for Kiran or Jessica, we can bring them up too. As a reminder, to ask a question, your webcam enabled. You can see on the lower right-hand part of your screen, you can click the raise hand button. And I am on the admin side. I can see that you have a raised hand, and I can bring you to the stage to ask your question in front of the audience. If you're not webcam enabled, you can ask your question via IM text. It's just clicking the ask a question button. And you can type your question, and we can ask your question on your behalf. All right, so without further ado, I'll bring Melanie up to the stage, and you can see we have 1 question already, and from Jamil. Let's kick off a great Q&A. Thanks.
Well, I just want to thank Kieran and Jessica for a really fascinating overview. And why don't we jump right into questions? Jamil, welcome.
Okay, I'm just checking to see if people are hearing me. I don't think I have my mute on. So somebody make a sign if they can hear me. Yeah, okay, good. All right. Well, I thought those were two great presentations. Good,
I hear you.
thank you. One of the challenges about telling the story of peace building is that, at least in a conventional sense, that is a CNN, broadcast media sense, the most dramatic thing about a story of peace building is what isn't happening, in a sense. It's the violence that isn't happening is the most dramatic, and therefore, so there's a challenge to telling the story of peace builders, because it's really an internal, what happens between when warring or opposing parties meet is the transformation that goes on that allows them to reach some sort of agreement. But it's a very quiet process, and it's not. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of shine a light on that aspect of it, the fact that it's a challenge to tell working in Haiti, and there was a big drama around a sad story of a kid who got diphtheria. And that was a story that made it to television, even in the United States. The problem was that he was an exception and that 2 million people were vaccinated. But nobody ever told the story of the 2 million people being vaccinated. They just told the story. And this kid had actually been vaccinated. He was just one of those rare moments. So that's just an example of where what we're dealing with in terms of media. The other thing I want to add, is that a very powerful tool in storytelling is the use of metaphors, and I'm sure some people can give us examples. That's really all the two thoughts I wanted to add, to this. But it's great to be able to share.
Great. Thank you so much, Jamil. And it's something that we're up against as a field is the idea of if it bleeds, it leads. And how do we tell the story that is as compelling as the stories about war and violence? And I wonder if neuroscience is working against us, that studies have actually shown that stories about violence capture our brains in a way that stories about peace do not. And how can we work around that hard wiring that we have? So are there other questions, comments? Hey, Susan.
Hi, this is great. I'm so excited by it. And just a few thoughts. Connecting the stories with short video clips, I think, can be really powerful. And I think also looking for some aspects of the work that's being done in neuroscience now that links happiness to better societies. When we look at conflict, we can look at global conflict, but also conflict within communities in our own countries. We know all the conflict that can exist between men and women and finding positions of leadership among families. But I guess I'm just suggesting that we find some science, which is also always very compelling to people, that supports this important point that Jamil made, that when you don't have violent conflict, how do you show that? And I think we could do something with some of the really interesting biological and neuroscience that's going on. Thanks.
Susan, would you like to say a few words about the film that you're making? 'Cause I think that's a very compelling use of storytelling in itself.
Am I on? Can you hear me? Hi. Yes, I'm making a film called A Child's Guide to War. And my goal for this is to really prompt better conversations among Americans about when and why we go to war. And we've been at war for the last 13 years. And the idea was that we would listen to children talk about it. What is the impact of war on them? Over 1 million have a parent who's been at war. Obviously, there's a lot of trauma among those children and a lot of pride as well. But just really my overarching goal is to have all of us in America have better conversations about going to war and what is the true cost of war. And I focus on America because it's very easy for Americans to say war is in Afghanistan and war is in other countries. It's really not our problem. And I see this big disconnect between the military and the military families in this country who have taken on a great deal of trauma and pain and work over these past many years. And so many of my friends and colleagues who have no connection to the military and no appreciation for that toll. So the film is attempting to bridge these two groups and create a film for all of us. And we're talking with public television and hoping to develop a curriculum to go with this so that in the schools, kids could learn about war. And interestingly enough, in New York, in the public schools, there's a proposal to start teaching kids in 3rd grade about war. It's optional for the teachers whether they do that, but I think if we bring our children who are real stakeholders in this, if you're a 10-year-old in 8 years, you can become a soldier and you can vote, and it's too easy to think we won't be at war again anytime soon, but we all know differently. We know we'll have a new president in America in 2 years. We know what's happening in Russia and Iran and many parts of the world that could spill over into violent conflict. So that's the project, and it's going to be all about storytelling, and I really appreciate hearing your idea.
Susan, I'm glad to finally hear more details about the film, so that's great. So I feel like a few of the things people have said about ways that help us tell the stories, and we're talking about film, metaphor. I think Susan also mentioned video clips that accompany, articles. And one of the things I wanted to say that we're doing differently in the magazine, in the issue that comes out next week, which we haven't done before, is we're profiling a photography exhibit that took place at Boston's Museum of Fine Arts this past year, which is called She Tells a Story, which is a photography exhibit by female photographers from Iran and the Arab world of almost exclusively women subjects. And the exhibit was personal and political. It was about social change, about economic change, about tradition. And we, in our magazine to date, we had done reviews of documentary films, we had done reviews of books. But then when I saw that exhibit here in Boston, and we were already formulating this women, men, and peace building issue, I just thought, wow, like this is another way they are telling the story. And clearly that exhibit, is about creativity and an aesthetic, and it wasn't designed to talk about peace building. But really, in the article in the magazine, it's talking about how photographers, in particular women photographers, do use their cameras to tell stories of transformational change. So that I wanted to mention that because I think it's just another tool we have to get the word out and tell stories.
Just 2 other thoughts. One, what if we had a moth hour for peace building in DC, and we get a place and we have 10 or so people telling their stories live to an audience? I think that'd be really cool. And the other thought I had was connecting up with journalists. So up here in Cambridge, with the Alliance for Peace Building and the Neiman Foundation and the Shorenstein Center and Program on Negotiation, for over 9 years, we've had a seminar series on negotiation, conflict, and the news media, where we link up conflict resolution professionals with journalists. And the idea is to help the journalists think of us more when they're reporting on conflict. And so in the build-up to the war in Iraq, we all remember that very few people in our field were consulted or asked their views. And so here we've been working on that for a number of years. So I could see having an interesting seminar sometime with our storytellers and journalists.
I thought it was interesting, a couple of comments about how we gather together. I should probably illustrate that there's a difference between what we might be thinking about in terms of live storytelling and the written storytelling, and whether we read stories on paper, whether we hear them with our, whether we listen to them and that experience. One of the things that we do here in Tennessee is that we run the oldest and the largest storytelling festival in the world. And some years ago, we had Alex Haley here, who was the author of Roots, and he said, without storytelling, there would be no Roots. And there's something about when we had Pete Seeger here and many sort of mastercraft storytellers that are following a tradition that goes back hundreds of years. There's a difference between when you hear a story on a piece of paper to hearing a story live in person from a mastercraft storyteller. And I think one of the things we must not forget and must keep our ears open to are the stories that we might be missing. And I think when we listen to the stories from the generations before us, from communities around us, and we listen to traditional stories, Appalachian stories, or stories from West Africa, stories that have been passed and come into this land, America, through enslavement, that come from West Africa. There are really powerful, meaningful stories that we can learn so much from. And we can learn so much from because storytellers played such a more of an important role in peace building for centuries. Now, we're talking about how we connect storytelling with peace building today, but also know that it has been going on since ancient times. And storytellers were the peacemakers. Storytellers were peacemakers in communities, in traditions, from Amazonia to Africa to Southeast Asia, all across the world. So something I'd like to just throw into the mix is that we must not forget traditional storytelling, and really the power of how we transform a really complex idea into something that's meaningful to contemporary audiences. For example, this year we're working with a group of young slam poets that have been collecting stories in Syrian refugee camps, and they are now converting this into a performative slam performance that will be an hour long, so people in this country can understand what is going on with communities affected by, or refugees affected by persecution and war. And I think the same thing what we can do is when we're working on policies, or we're working on evaluation tools at a high level with the USAID or the United Nations or agencies, complex ideas, how can we turn these complex ideas, this interwovenness that we're all, these many different facets, into something that's a performative form of storytelling that contemporary audiences, young people from 5 to 85 can understand. And I think that's the power of storytelling. When you experience the moment together, whether it's on a festival or in a setting or on stage or with 10 people in a circle, there is something about that powerful moment. And as Alex Haley said, without storytelling, there will be no roots. We have to look at the way where we come from, where our traditions come from, and the communities around us, because we have a lot to learn from that. And maybe you just like to pose this idea, if we were to, explore this idea that maybe a year of the storyteller or a year of the story, every hour on Google Alerts, I can show you my phone, I tap in storytelling, every hour I get anything that's on the World Wide Web come straight to my phone. And it's interesting to see how storytelling is used in brand storytelling, from filmmaking to media. And I think the peace building world, maybe we need to catch up. And we are not just working in one format, but across all the genres of storytelling. And it's good to see we're talking about metaphors, working with folklorists, working with filmmakers, with magazines, human stories, and personal narratives, as well as traditional narrative.
So one of the things that I want to return to is a question I posed earlier, and perhaps now people would feel comfortable providing some insights or reactions, and if not, we could do it offline, but I'd be truly interested to know, presuming that most, I don't know all of you, but presuming most of you are peace building practitioners or scholar practitioners or development practitioners, I'd be interested to know when you talk to, when you've been in a country working, or hosting a group in the US of folks from Liberia or Libya or Sri Lanka, and then before you know it, it's the weekend and you're with your partners or you're with your cousins or you're at the cafe and someone says, oh yeah, you were away, how was that trip? Or I know you were, you met with a group of Sri Lankan women, what was that like? I mean, what are the snippets that you share that people react to? I mean, and what are those snippets that move you, that make you think, oh, this is the story I want to tell someone else, that exemplifies what I do and why I do it? I'd be interested to hear from you some examples of those.
Great, thank you everyone. I'd like to put Jamil on the spot. As a filmmaker for his career, he's worked in many of the environments in which we're working as peace builders, most specifically Burundi, for a long period of time. And Jamil, when you're shaping your film messages, how are you reaching out to the hearts and minds of your audience?
Well, the thing is, we haven't actually, I personally haven't filmed in Burundi yet. We've been trying to raise the funds that we need to make the film. So we're still working on that. We have a cameraman there, but the story of peace building in Burundi is one that I think is a very powerful one, in that it's a very interesting model. It's one where they, over an 8-year period, with funding from USAID and the World Bank, this group of peace builders under the direction of Howard Wolpe trained 1,000 leaders in this country over that 8-year period. Everybody ranging from all the presidents who've had been in office the last 4 or 5 years, to local police chiefs and mayors. And so a lot of people benefited from that, and it was a transformative experience. And that's one of the things that we want to capture in our documentary that we're now seeking funds for. But I have used media and storytelling in other places where we've for example, in Jordan, we designed a program to teach conflict resolution skills to little children, to middle school children, and we used a lot of storytelling there, and we had puppets, and we had singing and skits and all those kinds of things. And I think metaphors and stories are really powerful devices for allowing people to see a point of view. And the exciting thing about about when I think about, I was saying before that the drama is elsewhere. That is, the drama is what didn't happen. There is still real drama that takes place in terms of the movement that people make in terms of their own personal transformations. And when you think about it, a lot of television drama that doesn't have swords and all the weapons and everything is really about personal drama. And I think there is a way and I'm hoping we can find a way in telling the story of peace building in Burundi to really explore that dimension, that very personal dimension. But I don't know if I'm answering Melanie's question now. I got lost on my little trajectory on Burundi, but I appreciate the invitation. I do want to endorse what Susan Hackley said earlier about educating journalists. I think it's very important that we make a concerted effort to educate journalists about peace building, because they simply don't understand what it is. And I agree, they don't consult peace builders when there is a conflict. But I think I've spoken enough already. So I'll cede the floor back to Melanie.
Thank you, Jamil, and thanks to all of you. Susan, I thought these were wonderful ideas that we cut out for a little bit just after you spoke, so I wasn't able to respond, but I would love to talk with you more offline. We just have a couple of minutes left, so I wanted to thank all of you for joining us. We're still getting our feet wet technically, but it's wonderful to be able to see all of you, and we'll work out any future kinks. I wanted to remind you that we will hold these calls at regular intervals throughout the year. So if any of you have suggestions about topics or speakers, please let us know. I want to encourage all of you to be on the lookout for the launch of the next issue of Building Peace, which should happen in the next 10 days. As Jessica said, this is on men, women, and war and peace. And finally, to let you to keep an eye out for our social media campaign that AFP is trying to move into a broader network and to use social media as a way to reach out to people who might not be more involved with our own communities' debates and conversations. So are there any other questions or comments before we say goodbye? Well, thank you, Philip. Thank you again tonight, and especially to Kieran and Jessica. It's been a really fascinating conversation. I see one more person coming on. Is that Philip? Yeah.
Yes, I'm seeing one more question from Kiran. Let's see if we can bring him up. Hold on.
Hello?
Hey.
Okay. Not sure if I'm on, but I'll just try and end with a quote. This is a quote by Antonio Rocha. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try this. It's Antonio Rocha, a master storyteller, and he says that stories beget understanding, understanding begets respect, respect begets justice, and justice begets peace. That is the power of story. It's just a quote that I have pinned on my door, and I thought it would be a nice thing to end with.
That is lovely. I think between that and the idea that without it would have no roots is a beautiful way to end and to capture this conversation. So thanks again to all of you, and we'll look forward to our next peace call.